Marcus Thompson adjusted his backpack as he walked home from basketball practice, streetlights casting long shadows on the suburban sidewalk. At 17, he was one of the brightest students at Lincoln High School, carrying a 4.0 GPA while captaining the varsity team. That ordinary Tuesday evening was about to become anything but normal. The police cruiser rolled up slowly beside him, its headlights cutting through the early evening darkness. Officer James Miller had been on patrol for 8 hours, his mind clouded by a recent argument with his daughter and mounting pressure from his superiors about his aggressive policing style. He'd received 3 complaints in the past month alone. "Hey, you! Stop right there!" Officer Miller's voice cracked through the quiet neighborhood. Marcus froze, his heart pounding against his chest. He'd heard too many stories, seen too many videos, and his parents had warned him about moments exactly like this. "Sir, I'm just walking home from practice," Marcus said calmly, remembering his father's advice. "Stay composed, speak clearly, make no sudden movements." But Officer Miller was already out of his car, hand resting on his holster. "There's been a robbery reported in the area. Subject matches your description," Miller barked, though no such report had actually been filed. Nearby, Mrs. Rodriguez from number 42 began recording on her phone from her porch, her hands shaking. "Get on the ground. Now." Miller's command echoed off the houses. Marcus slowly complied, the cold concrete pressing against his cheek as his basketball medals clinked inside his backpack. His mind raced to the college acceptance letter from Stanford sitting on his desk at home. Would he even make it there? Several neighbors emerged from their homes, phones raised, capturing every second. Sarah Chen, Marcus's debate team partner, recognized him immediately and started live streaming. "That's Marcus Thompson," she shouted. "He's the student body president." The tension crackled in the air like electricity before a storm. Officer Miller's body camera recorded everything: his harsh commands, Marcus's perfect compliance, and the growing crowd of witnesses. Neither of them knew it yet, but this moment would spark a chain of events that would change not just their lives, but their entire community's future. This wasn't just another police stop. This was the moment when years of systemic issues, personal biases, and community tensions would finally reach their breaking point. But sometimes, it's only when things break that they can be rebuilt into something stronger. The video of Marcus's encounter with Officer Miller spread like wildfire across social media. Within hours, thousands had shared Mrs. Rodriguez's shaky footage, and Sarah Chen's live stream had reached over 1 million views. The local news stations picked up the story for their evening broadcasts, showing Marcus's spotless academic record alongside his terrifying encounter. Marcus sat in his family's living room, surrounded by his parents and younger sister. His mother, Dr. Thompson, a respected pediatrician, gripped his hand tightly as they watched their phone notifications explode. His father, a civil rights attorney, was already making calls to colleagues and community leaders. At the police station, Officer Miller faced his superior, Captain Reynolds, who slammed a tablet showing the viral video onto his desk. "This isn't 1950, Miller. What were you thinking?" Reynolds demanded. Miller sat stiffly, his jaw clenched as he watched himself on screen. Something about seeing his actions from this perspective made his stomach turn. The local NAACP chapter organized an emergency meeting at the First Baptist Church. Hundreds packed the pews, with Marcus and his family seated in the front row. Community leaders spoke passionately about change, but this time felt different. The crowd included faces from every neighborhood, every background, including several off-duty police officers who'd come to show support. Local news reporter Diana Martins dug deeper into both sides of the story. She uncovered Officer Miller's decorated military service, his struggle with PTSD after returning from Afghanistan, and the recent death of his wife. She also revealed Marcus's extensive volunteer work with underprivileged kids and his full scholarship offers from multiple prestigious universities. The police department faced mounting pressure. Chief Wilson called an emergency press conference, announcing an immediate investigation and promising transparency. But behind closed doors, he knew this incident could either tear the community apart or become a catalyst for real change. The story took an unexpected turn when Marcus's Stanford acceptance letter became public. The contrast between his achievements and his treatment sparked even more outrage. Officer Miller watched his own daughter's social media posts supporting Marcus, and for the first time, he began to see beyond his own perspective. The weight of his actions, and their potential to destroy not just Marcus's future, but his own, finally hit him. As night fell on the second day after the incident, both Marcus and Officer Miller lay awake in their beds, unknowingly sharing the same thought. Tomorrow would bring either more division or the first steps toward healing. Neither could have predicted the extraordinary events that would unfold next. The next morning, local reporter Diana Martinez made a surprising discovery as she dug deeper into both Marcus and Officer Miller's backgrounds. Marcus had been quietly running a mentorship program for at-risk youth at the community center, the same center where Officer Miller's late wife had volunteered before her passing 2 years ago. The story took on new dimensions as Martinez uncovered photographs of Miller's wife working alongside young volunteers, including Marcus, though they'd never directly met. The images showed a different side of Miller, one of a man who once actively supported community programs before grief and stress had hardened him. At school, Marcus faced a mix of attention he never wanted. Some students treated him like a celebrity, while others whispered about him starting trouble. But it was his chemistry teacher, Mrs. Patel, who shared a crucial piece of information. She had taught Officer Miller's daughter and remembered how Miller used to bring cookies to every parent-teacher conference. Meanwhile, Officer Miller sat through mandatory counseling sessions where he finally spoke about his wife's death, his struggles with PTSD, and how fear had begun driving his decisions on patrol. His counselor gently pointed out how his recent aggressive behavior stemmed from his own unresolved trauma rather than any real threats. The police department's internal investigation revealed a pattern. Miller's incident reports had grown increasingly hostile over the past 2 years, coinciding with his wife's passing. Yet his earlier records showed commendations for community policing and de-escalation, a stark contrast to his recent behavior. Marcus's father discovered these records and recognized something familiar in Miller's story. 20 years ago, he'd defended a veteran struggling with similar issues. That case had ended with rehabilitation, not punishment, and the officer went on to become one of the department's most respected mentors. As community tensions peaked, an unexpected ally emerged. Officer Rodriguez, Miller's former partner, shared stories of Miller's past dedication to youth programs and his gradual transformation after losing his wife. These revelations made headlines alongside Marcus's story, painting a complex picture of human struggle and the need for understanding. The unforeseen connections between Marcus and Miller's lives began weaving a different narrative than anyone had expected. It wasn't just about one incident anymore. It was about loss, healing, and the possibility of redemption. Neither of them knew it yet, but these discoveries would pave the way for an extraordinary meeting that would change everything. The mandatory bias training day arrived at the police department, but it wasn't the typical PowerPoint presentation everyone expected. Instead, the department brought in Dr. Sarah Chen, a renowned expert in community relations, and coincidentally, the mother of Marcus's debate team partner. Officer Miller sat in the back row, attempting to blend into the shadows. But Dr. Chen had different plans. She began by sharing body camera footage, not of violent confrontations, but of positive police interactions that had changed lives. Among them was footage from Miller's early career, showing him talking down a suicidal teenager and later mentoring him. As Miller watched his younger self, something cracked in his carefully constructed armor. His daughter, Emily, had chosen this exact day to share a personal essay on social media about growing up with a police officer father, describing how he changed after her mother's death. The essay went viral, adding another layer to the unfolding story. Meanwhile, Marcus made a bold decision. During a school assembly about civic engagement, he spoke not about his trauma, but about understanding and healing. He shared stories about the kids he mentored, including Officer Miller's nephew, though neither had made the connection until now. The coincidence stunned both families. The local coffee shop, neutral ground in the community, became an unexpected meeting point. Miller stopped for his morning coffee, just as Marcus's mother was leaving. Their eyes met, and instead of tension, there was recognition. Dr. Thompson had treated Miller's wife during her illness. The brief exchange they shared would later prove crucial. Captain Reynolds watched these developments closely. He'd been tracking Miller's progress in counseling and noticed subtle changes. The officer who once radiated anger now showed signs of his old self, the mentor, the protector, the man who'd joined the force to make a difference. The turning point came during a community basketball game. The police department's team was scheduled to play against the high school seniors. Miller, still on administrative duty, came to watch. He saw Marcus on the court, leading his team with the same calm authority he'd shown during their confrontation. For the first time, Miller saw not a threat, but a leader. As the game reached its climax, a medical emergency in the stands brought both Marcus and Miller running to help. Together, they performed CPR on an elderly spectator until paramedics arrived. In that moment, working side by side, their shared humanity overshadowed everything else. The community center buzzed with tension as Marcus and Officer Miller sat across from each other for the first time since their confrontation. Reverend Jackson, who'd known both families for years, facilitated the meeting. The room was small, with just a table and 4 chairs, but it felt like the whole town was holding its breath. "I was scared," Marcus began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Not just for myself, but for what my little sister would think, seeing her brother face down on the concrete." His words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Miller nodded, his police badge absent, wearing civilian clothes that made him look somehow smaller, more human. "I was scared too," he admitted, surprising everyone. "I'd been seeing threats everywhere since Sarah, my wife, passed. Every shadow, every movement." His voice cracked. The conversation flowed unexpectedly as they discovered shared connections. Miller learned that Marcus had helped his nephew improve his grades. Marcus discovered that Miller's late wife had been his mother's favorite nurse colleague. Outside, media crews waited, but inside, something remarkable was happening. Miller pulled out his phone, showing Marcus a photo of himself coaching youth baseball years ago. "This was who I used to be," he said, "who I want to be again." Marcus shared his Stanford acceptance letter, and Miller's eyes widened at the familiar letterhead. "My daughter's dream school," he said softly. "She's applying next year." For the first time, they saw each other as people with dreams, fears, and families. The meeting stretched from its planned hour into 3. They talked about police reform, community needs, and personal responsibility. But they also discussed basketball strategies, favorite local restaurants, and funny stories about Miller's nephew. By the time they emerged, both had undergone a transformation. Marcus had seen the human behind the badge, and Miller had confronted his biases head-on. But neither could have predicted what would happen next, as their personal reconciliation was about to spark a bigger change in their community. Changes swept through the police department faster than anyone expected. The incident between Marcus and Miller had become a catalyst for reform. The department unveiled a new training program, with Officer Miller surprisingly taking a leading role alongside community leaders. Together, Marcus and Miller launched Bridge the Gap, weekly meetings where teens and officers played basketball, shared meals, and most importantly, talked. The first session was awkward, with both sides keeping their distance. But by the 3rd week, genuine friendships began forming. Officer Miller's transformation became the talk of the town. He started each shift by visiting local schools, high-fiving students, and checking in with teachers. His fellow officers noticed the change. The angry man who'd once terrified a teenager was now the department's strongest advocate for community policing. Marcus's influence grew too. He organized a youth council that met regularly with police leadership, His Stanford acceptance became a symbol of hope, proof that one incident didn't define a person's future. Local businesses put up signs supporting both him and the reform efforts. The media returned, but this time for a different story. National news covered their unlikely partnership as a model for other cities. Miller appeared on morning shows, openly discussing his past mistakes and the importance of addressing mental health in law enforcement. Their story reached Washington, where lawmakers invited both to testify about community policing. Marcus spoke about forgiveness and growth, while Miller addressed the need for better officer support systems. Their testimony helped shape new legislation. Local crime rates dropped as trust grew between police and residents. Other departments sent observers to learn from their program. But the most powerful moments were the small ones. Miller helping a teen with homework, Marcus teaching young officers about teenage perspectives, both men working together to bridge a divide they'd once embodied. 1 year had passed since that tense evening on the suburban sidewalk. The autumn air carried the sounds of laughter and cheering from the community center's basketball court. Marcus, home from his first semester at Stanford, stood beside Officer Miller, both coaching a mixed team of teens and rookie officers. Marcus had excelled in his criminal justice program, his experience driving him to study police reform and community relations. His professors often used his story in lectures, but Marcus always emphasized how it demonstrated the possibility of change, rather than dwelling on the confrontation. Miller had become the department's deputy chief of community relations. His office walls displayed photos of youth program graduations alongside his daughter's Stanford acceptance letter. She'd gotten in, with a recommendation letter from Marcus. The two families had grown surprisingly close, sharing holiday meals and celebrating milestones together. The Bridge the Gap program had expanded to 20 other cities. Police departments nationwide sent representatives to learn their methods. But more importantly, local teens no longer crossed the street when seeing an officer approach. Instead, they often stopped to chat, sharing news about school or asking for advice. The viral video that had once sparked outrage now appeared in police training sessions nationwide, but with a different purpose. It was shown alongside recent footage of Marcus and Miller leading workshops together, a powerful testament to the possibility of transformation. At a graduation ceremony for their latest youth mentorship program, Miller stood at the podium, his badge gleaming. "A year ago, I was part of the problem," he admitted to the crowd. "Today, thanks to a young man who chose understanding over anger, I'm part of the solution." Marcus, sitting in the front row, nodded in acknowledgement. As the ceremony ended, they watched their latest group of graduates, teens and officers who'd begun as strangers and emerged as allies. A local artist had painted a mural on the community center wall, two hands clasped in unity, one in a police uniform sleeve, the other wearing a Stanford sweatshirt. Beneath it read, "Change begins with understanding."